Welcome to Travel for Curious Minds, brought to you by Jules Verne. I'm Debbie, the Managing Director at Jules Verne. I'm really excited about this podcast. In each episode, we bring to you an amazing guest with some incredible stories inspiring you to travel the globe and unleash your curiosity for travel. So now, let's go over to your host, Abbey, and meet this episode's guest.
I am so beyond excited to be sat here with Eleanor Mills. Eleanor, you are just a hero of so many people at Jules Verne, especially our managing director and myself. So I am really pleased to be sitting down with you. You are the best-selling author, campaigner, discoverer of the Queenager, everything. So hello.
Hello, lovely to be here.
This is a really exciting episode. Let's kind of just dive straight into it. First of all, you are the founder of Noon and the inventor of Queenager. So can you let our listeners know a little bit about you, kind of how you came to this stage in your life and what you're doing really for that Queenager movement and how you're empowering people?
Oh, what a great question. Well, thanks very much for having me, Abby. So I talk about Queenagers, which is my term for women in midlife. So that's broadly kind of 45 plus. I did used to put an upper end of it of about 65, 70, but the older Queenagers got a bit cross about that. So we decided that Queenager is a state of mind and we have no upper age limit. And I did that because I'm interested in trying to change the story that we tell about women at this stage to something a bit more positive and fit for purpose. That's why I talk about Queenagers rather than the kind of hags or crones or kind of some of the other things. Or what someone came up to me the other day and said, oh, they come up with a name which was the Menopause. I really don't want to be in the menopause posse, like that. I don't want to be defined in that way. So what we're trying to do at Noon is to create a more positive story about what's possible for women at 45 plus. And I became particularly interested in this. My background is I'm a journalist. I worked for the Sunday Times for 25 years. I was the editor of the Sunday Times magazine. I was an award-winning interviewer and writer and that kind of thing, and was the editorial director of the paper. So I was a kind of pretty big name journo for quite a long time. And what happened to me happens to many women in midlife. Just before I was 50, I was told that my services were no longer required after nearly 25 years at the company, which was a massive shock. And what I discovered in the aftermath was that there was very little out there in the world saying how we might reinvent or recreate or how we start a new chapter at 50. And I remember searching midlife redundancy, and the only thing that came up was the HMRC website, which was not the kind of inspiring content I was really after in that moment. And so, I kind of decided that I would become the change that I wanted to see. And so I set up a platform for women in midlife, my Queenagers, called Noon, as in the middle of the day, noon.org.uk, because I think in the 100-year life, well, it's true, 50 is only halfway through. And part of the longevity dividend, which my generation is lucky enough really to inhabit, is this extra bit of time between 50 and 75, where if we're lucky, we've still got health span. So we're still quite healthy. We've got some money because we're the first generation who've kind of worked a lot all the way through to this point. We entered the workforce in the same numbers as men. And we're hitting 50 with very different attitudes and conceptions about the world and expectations, I think, than the women who came before us did. And we are wanting more from life, and particularly a lot more from this bit between 50 and 75, where too often in the culture, older women can be written off when they get to this point and seen as, slightly over the hill or past it, or there's all that ridiculous stuff in the culture around older men getting better with age, like fine wine, all that kind of silver foxes stuff. Whereas women are quite often seen as kind of feeling maybe being a bit past it. I think we're quite often seen, particularly in the media, to age like peaches, one wrinkle and we're done, rather than having a more positive story about what's possible for women at this point. So what I set out to do was to create the kind of map, the signpost, the vision that I was looking for when I was suddenly made redundant at nearly 50, and what that new phase might look like for other women. So Noon is all about transitions, transformation, saying yes to joy, and sailing into this later bit of our lives in a much more positive way, and really reimagining what that can be like for our generation who have had a very different experience up to now and are not going to go gently into that good night, as the poem goes.
It's such an amazing concept and such an amazing movement as well. Do you think that if you hadn't had that experience where you were kind of told, you know what, your services aren't required, that, you know, thank you very much, you've done an amazing job for us, but we're going in a different direction or whatever. Do you think if you hadn't had that moment, this wouldn't have happened? Or do you think there's always been that queenager inside you ready to kind of pop out? Because I mean, I'm looking at this as someone in their 30s, kind of thinking, yeah, like my mum's a queenager. I love this. Like I'm going to be a queenager. So do you think it's always been inside you, just bubbling away?
I think I've always been, I mean, I've made my living for a long time as a communicator. I was a columnist and an interviewer, and I've done a lot of broadcasting and telly. And listeners, if you want to have a look at me, there's some quite funny videos of me out there online on things like Good Morning Britain with Piers Morgan, with him like banging his head on the table. So I think I've always been quite outspoken. I was chair of something called Women in Journalism for nearly 7 years. So I'm also very interested in how the culture views women, how it makes women view themselves, how that's molded very much by what we see in the media, and how we could change that. And also, as somebody of 53, I've lived through an era in which we've completely changed the way that we talk about race. Growing up, the kind of things that people would say about race, you would never dream of saying now. And the same is true of sexuality, particularly around homosexuality and trans stuff and all that kind of thing. And so I do profoundly believe, maybe I'm an optimist, I do profoundly believe that we can change the way that we think about things as a society, and that we can change the way that we value women as they age. Because what I learned through my years at Women in Journalism, and of course having had a real hot seat right at the front of a massive national newspaper, is quite how biased, particularly in terms of gender, much of the reporting in the media is. So I was a real bore at the Sunday Times. I would do a lot of sitting in conference, going through a list and going, okay, every single woman on this list is either a victim or arm candy. You know, where is the story about a woman with agency doing something in her own right? And so often the way that women were described was very sexist, or that women were only put in newspapers for how they looked. That's the kind of arm candy piece. Or I can remember being told by a picture editor once when I was a journalist, oh, brighten up the page, love, which meant putting a picture of a pretty girl. So I think that there's a big hangover from that. You know, it's not that long ago that women were used like kind of baskets of fruit, or kind of like, you know, extra treats at the end of a meal, as a kind of draped over tractors or cars, or, you know, as a kind of extra little bonus to sell products. And I think that there's still quite a lot of that in the way that the advertising and marketing and media industry works. So quite a lot of my book, which is called Much More to Come, is looking at that the way that women are taught to think about themselves. So for instance, when Theresa May went to talk to Nicola Sturgeon about Brexit, the front page of the newspaper the next day was, forget about Brexit, it's all about Legsit. And there were pictures of both of their legs and who had the sexiest legs, which is basically saying to any woman, it doesn't matter how powerful you are, you know, in politics, you're a leader of a nation, you're still being judged on, you know, how sexy your legs are. So that is what I call the male lens in action. And I think that that's important because it makes women feel that they're only valuable as long as they're kind of young and pretty and fertile. That's kind of broadly what patriarchy values women for. And so in the same way that we change that story about race or about sexuality, I think we can change the story that we tell about what women are for, you know, what we value them for. And that really affects how women are perceived and what we're seen as capable of 50 plus. And so what I'm really trying to do is to extend the runway for all women. I want women in their 30s like you, or like my daughters in their 20s, to look forward to being in their 50s, in their 60s, in their 70s, for when they become queenagers, for when it gets really good. And what we see very much in the research that we did, we're sitting on one of the biggest research projects yet on women 45 plus in the UK. And we see that although that they go through pinch points as they hit about 50, that then it gets better. And the women who've been through the most end up the happiest, which I think is really interesting. And also that this is a bit of life that we haven't really had before. So if you think about the old way of thinking about life in 3 bits, you kind of, got educated, grow up, then you would work somewhere for a long time, and then you would retire, a kind of 3-part life. That now in the 100-year life, we need to think about life in 4 parts, maybe rather than 3. So maybe 0 to 25 is grow, 25 to 50. I see very much as the years of achievement. I think for a lot of women, they're like the years of survival, because we're like trying to tick off all the boxes of all the things that we've been told to do, kind of get ourselves established in careers, get a house, get a partner, maybe have some kids. Although interestingly, nearly 30% of university educated women in my generation don't have children, although that's still very much the way that women are defined. So I think that there's a huge discrepancy between what our culture kind of says we should be doing and the reality of what so many women are doing. So I think that that's really interesting. And then I think the other thing that this 4-part life gives us is this capacity of 50, that 50 to 75 bit, I see as the time of becoming. That queenager period is about becoming the women we always wanted to be, and that maybe life got in the way of. So at Noon, we run events and retreats and holidays, and particularly Noon circles, we call them, where everybody comes and the women come together and they talk about what they're going through and what they want to achieve and what's going on for them. And what is incredible in that is just the sense of these amazing women, and how that some of them have lost track of who they wanted to be when they were younger, but also that there's this possibility at kind of 50 to go back to that. So for me, I've just written a book. I set up 2 companies since I turned 50. I think it's going to be a real period of kind of growth and expansion. And a lot of women are made to feel bad about themselves or quite invisible at this point, which is just really unnecessary. And we can change that story.
And I think one of the things that sort of resonates with me when you're talking as well is the confidence that can come at that age of 50 plus, that actually, you've got this, like you said, you have grown, you have achieved, you've got all of this experience and this wisdom, and now is time to go back to who you really are, go back to the roots of you and discover yourself again. And I think, like you said, with the retreats and the holidays, it's just a chance to kind of bring that confidence level up in yourself and enjoy that 3rd stage going into the 4th stage of life. And I think that leads really nice on to sort of travel experiences for us as well, because a lot of our clientele are in that age range and they are doing things that maybe 40-year-old customers would sit there and think, oh, I'm not sure about that. But actually going out there and experiencing the world, seeing new cultures is incredible. Do you think Queenager is sort of international? Do you think that, there are different cultures around the world where women's ages are perceived differently? But do you think you can take it international and you can connect with women in India, in, the Silk Road, in Japan and things like that?
Absolutely. So one of the trips that we ran is I took a group of 15 British Queenagers to Morocco, and we went really off-road. We kind of went over from Marrakesh, we went over the Atlas Mountains and then kind of turned left, which most people don't. We drove about 6 hours up the other side of the Atlas Mountains, the Sahara side, to a place called the Valley of the Roses. And we drove up into the mountains to the point where the roads stop. And at that point, we walked. We went on this incredible trek. All our luggage was carried by mules, as such as it was. And we stayed in the local houses of local women. We had a local Berber guide who was a woman in her late 50s, early 60s, who was one of Morocco's first ever mountain guides, female mountain guides. And we had this incredible all-woman walk. We walked around these dry river valleys over 3 really high passes. On one day we did 3 1,800-meter passes and walked 25 kilometers. So that, I think that was also interesting for the women to see how far they could push themselves physically. But what came out of that incredible adventure were the most amazing conversations. So often what we see in the Noon Circle is women beginning to speak out loud their real kind of inner dreams or their their real sadnesses, and the truth comes out. So I think what you see walking around the Atlas with a whole load of women who, there's no makeup, there's no glass of white wine, there's no we were all sharing a shower, we were sitting around low tables to eat, we were walking together every day. And what came down was like all the barriers between people were erased. All the masks that we might wear kind of came down. And I heard so often on that week women going, wow, there are people who've known me for 30 years who don't know any of this. And just this opportunity for women to really start to communicate their deepest kind of thoughts and passions and dreams about what their life might look like from then on. And what was also incredible was having done this amazing thing, having kind of climbed over these passes. And at one point we were having to cross rivers, snowmelt rivers high up in the Atlas, which are really quite strong. And on your own, you probably would have been swept away, but we were all kind of standing together, kind of linked arms. So there's also this incredible sense of the collective being stronger than the individual. And I think that the combination of those experiences, realizing that you can push yourself out of your comfort zone and do something that you didn't think that you could do, I think that was amazingly confidence building. And I think that being in that very supportive, loving group with women who were being entirely supportive, that kind of non-competitive, when you really feel like you can speak the truth which is in your heart without being judged, which is quite rare for lots of us. I think that was a really powerful combination of lots of the things that I talk about in my book and at Noon, but it almost kind of enacts it. Form becomes function, that the very fact that we're all on this kind of amazing walk, this journey together, becomes a kind of bigger adventure, almost like a rite of passage into midlife, that if you can do this, what else might you be able to do? And I think that Queenager experience and the possibility of using that kind of adventure holiday to kind of turbocharge your journey into the next phase of your life is really underestimated and underthought about. And also I'm interested in these women as consumers, because as I set up my business, I was amazed to discover that actually women 45 plus are behind over 90% of all household consumer spending decisions. And certainly when it comes to luxury travel, they're behind 80% of all luxury travel decisions. They're also buying cars and technology. And yet older people, particularly, and older women specifically, appear in less than 10% of advertising. So there's this massive discrepancy between who these women are, who they feel they are, what they can be, what they can achieve, and the way that brands generally talk to them. And I think that that's particularly true in travel. I spoke at the ABTA conference in Marrakesh last year about the Queenager opportunity, and it was funny. I was partnered with a Gen Z guy who was still at school, talking about the kind of Gen Z opportunity, and I was just laughing because I know that my children travel a lot, but guess who pays for it? I do. They don't. So I think it's interesting that there's this huge opportunity to target these women. And also lots of my women will travel alone or want to go with groups of other women. So they might, even the ones who are married, so about 40% of the women are on their own. But even the ones who are with partners, like taking trips with just their girlfriends or other women, or want to go on an adventure, or don't particularly want to go on a trip with their husband, or maybe they're doing multi-generational family trips where they're taking their kids, maybe their grandchildren, their partner. But they're doing lots of different, our research shows they're doing lots of different kinds of trips in a year. So there might be some family trips, there might be something they do with their partner, something they do with their girlfriend, something that they do, like skiing, which is a particular hobby. But I think that there's a real opportunity here for the travel industry to think about the kinds of adventures that Queenagers might like, and to really target them specifically with the right kind of imagery, which is absolutely not that kind of salt and pepper haired old couple walking down the beach holding hands, on a cruise. That kind of thing drives the women crazy because lots of them aren't in those kind of couples, so it makes them feel bad about themselves, and many of them never have been, and they don't want to do that kind of traveling. So I think it's a really missed trick, and it's something that I'm really excited about doing some more stuff with Debbie and with Jules Verne to try and bring some of this to life.
Definitely. And we are so excited about the possibilities. You know, there's a real buzz in our office because, like you said, a lot of our clientele are women who don't necessarily want to travel with their husbands or their partners or their friends and actually just want to go out and experience things. And doing that within a group environment makes you feel safer. So sometimes we find clients who have got a partner at home, children at home, but they're going to India for the first time because nobody in their household has an interest in going to India. But there's something inside them since they were a little girl who's always wanted to see the Taj Mahal. And you go with a group of, you know, mixed or singles or however you want to travel, you have that choice. You go there with the privacy of your own bedroom, but the group experience, and you stand there in front of the Taj Mahal and you are mesmerized about, you know, the sounds, the sights, the light as it hit it reflecting on you. And you've achieved something, haven't you? You've sat there and gone, I've achieved a dream that I've always wanted to see, and I've done it on my own, but I still feel really safe and I've got that connection and I can sit there of an evening and discuss it, like I said, in a circle and discuss your experiences. And I think it's, you know, it's an amazing opportunity and we are so excited about what is to come in the future. Travel's actually very important for you, isn't it? If you don't mind me touching on this, you met your husband while traveling. So it's something that's obviously inside yourself as well.
Well, I think that's true for many of my generation. So I think for us, I was born in 1970. And so at the end of the 80s, really the 90s, I would say practically everybody I knew went traveling. It was what we did. I suppose the world was a bit safer then. But I set off, I traveled all the way around Indonesia by myself for like 3 months. I can remember flying into Jakarta completely on my own. I'd never been there before. This is pre-mobile phones. So my daughter was in Colombia recently, but she was like WhatsApping me from, you know, Bogota or from the jungle or from the bus. So she was kind of always in contact. But when I landed in Jakarta by myself, I didn't know a soul in the whole of that continent. And I had no way of contacting anyone back home except for an extremely expensive phone call. So I also think one of the things that we see with the Queenagers is lots of them either did that kind of travelling and want to get back to it now that they're a bit more fancy free. Maybe their kids have left home if they had them, or they've got a bit of money. And so I think in Morocco, it was amazing to see some of the women standing on the top of these mountains going, wow, I haven't felt this free or this far away from civilization or this kind of independence since I went travelling in my 20s. So I think for some of the women, there's getting back to that. And then I think there are others who maybe wanted to do that when they were younger, but maybe, you know, were a bit frightened or didn't have the means or had kids early or whatever, who never got round to it. And they still have a really strong urge to see what's out there. I mean, I've always had a real wanderlust, I have to say. I met my husband traveling in India when I was 26. I'd gone out. I was working for the Telegraph and I got offered a job at the Sunday Times. It's funny, it bookends my time at the Sunday Times. And I was in a place called Hampi in Karnataka. I don't know if you've been there, but or listeners to this have been. But Hampi is the most beautiful landscape. It has these enormous boulders. It looks like a god has been kind of throwing enormous kind of pebbles around the place and stacking them up. And there are these temples inside the rocks. There's a kind of snake temple inside the rocks. And there are others which have got, it's made of the most lovely marble. And you can play tunes by striking the marble pillars. And we stayed, when I was there, we stayed in a guest house called the Shanti Guest House opposite a temple with a big elephant right at the top of the village. And I was just sitting there. I was traveling with a friend, and I was just sitting on the roof of the Shanti Guest House reading my book. And my friend Jim came up the stairs and he went, I'd like you to meet Derek. And he'd been traveling with Derek in Rajasthan before this. And Derek walked up onto the roof and we started chatting. And I have to say, we haven't ever really stopped chatting. We've been together ever since. So I'm a great believer that that travel really can change your life in very profound ways. I mean, I don't know if I'd ever have met Derek in England, even though he's English and he also studied English literature at university. And we did actually know some people in common, but I had to go all the way off to India to find him. And I've made other really good friends in my life traveling. I traveled all the way through Central America and Mexico, Guatemala and Belize. And I met a great friend there called Matt, who went out with one of my other friends and has been a big part of my life ever since. So I think it's really important to kind of take yourself off around the world and to see what's out there and to meet different people, and that anyone who's ever in a hole should think about just upping sticks and changing the walls. I said this to my daughter. She'd had a bad breakup with a boyfriend and she was feeling grim. And I was like, and she got herself on one of those schemes which you can do now, where she went and worked in she's a really good surfer. So she went and worked in a surf chalet in Portugal. And it was just such a kind of microcosm of why travel is good for the soul. So she went out there feeling all kind of sad. She's put up with this boyfriend. And, 6 weeks later, she was having an absolute ball in Portugal, so much so that she really didn't want to come back. She'd met a whole load of new friends, and, it was just like a whole new life. So I always say to my daughters, and I say to other people, if they're kind of fed up with where they are, you can get what I love, and I really believe, is you can get on a plane, you can change the walls, you can be somewhere completely different, and it doesn't even have to be expensive. You can just go, somewhere out there, the sun is shining and there's a whole new world for you to meet, and you never need to feel like you're stuck.
Travel is just good for the soul, I think. It's just good to connect with other people in different places and just be someone else and be somewhere else for just a little bit of time. With your experiences then and all your travel kind of stories, is there any destinations or countries or even people that have really sort of touched you and left an impression on your heart, and kind of you sit there and think, that's a really special place? I mean, India must be, because obviously you met the lovely Derek and you met your husband, but is there anywhere else that you sit there and think, that's where I belong, that's my place?
Yeah, well, I mean, India, definitely. I've been back there so many times since, and I love it. And in fact, my youngest daughter, Laura, her middle name is Hampi. She's Laura Scarlett Hampi. And she's named after Hampi, where we met. So India, definitely. But one of the other places that has huge resonance for me is Jamaica. Some of your listeners may never have been to Jamaica. And before I went to Jamaica, I'd always heard kind of slightly dodgy things about it that might be dangerous. But I have to say, I think Jamaica is one of the most beautiful, vibrant, incredible places in the whole world. Everything just pulsates with life. The colours of the flowers and the hummingbirds and the forest and the sea and the reef and the water there. And I love Jamaica and I love the people. And if you think about the kind of cultural impact of Jamaica, from reggae to all the kind of calypso music that comes out of there, and just it's massive cultural impact from Bob Marley kind of onwards. It's incredible that it's such a tiny island. It's about the size of Wales, and yet all the stuff comes out of there, but you can just feel it kind of pulsing off the people. And in fact, the whole concept of Queenager very much comes from Jamaica. I spend quite a lot of time out there. One of my friends has a house there, and I went out to Jamaica after I left the Sunday Times for a bit of R&R, and I found it massively kind of rejuvenating. But it was also very much part of my thinking around Queenager. I sat in a focus group here in the UK, and there was a woman who said, well, I'm about to hit 60, but I feel like I'm a teenager again. I feel like a teenager, but in my own house with nice sheets and posh tea. So I love that as a kind of thinking about what it feels like to be in your kind of 50s and 60s. When I went to Jamaica, one of the really interesting things there is about their perceptions of older women, to go back to your question. And in Jamaica, because lots of the families there are run by women, and older women particularly, the kind of matriarchs, and it kind of all revolves around them, there is a very different kind of attitude to them. So I was in Jamaica and we were all playing pickleball, which is a kind of like paddle kind of tennis. And there were a whole load of youths, probably about 40 young men, all playing football right next to us. We were a kind of group of 6 or something older women. And one of the women, I won't do the accent, turned to the boys and went, would you mind kicking the ball at the other end of the field, because they kept kind of kicking it into our tennis match. And immediately they were like, oh yes, of course, I'm so sorry. They all went off to the other end of the pitch. Not for a second did they kind of go, no, we're not going to do that. And I just thought that was so interesting that in a British London park, there'd been 40 youths playing football and a few old women went, oh, can you go and play at the other end? I mean, I don't think they would have done it, to put it politely. But it was so interesting in Jamaica how the respect for the older woman was massive. And they really see older women there as queens. So that was partly where the queen bit of the queenager came from. So I felt that we are like teenagers, but we're midlife queens coming into our prime. But going through that definitely going through that transitional phase that teenagers do. I think that there's a whole thing now that whatever you've been doing between about, probably between about 25 and 50, whatever it is you've been doing in that chunk, it kind of comes to an end. If you've been raising kids or at home with kids, you hit the empty nest and they leave. If you've been working somewhere, I mean, I had a pretty good run. I had like nearly 25 years in the same business, which is almost unheard of. And certainly what I see in the businesses around me and the women around me is that by the time we hit 50, 60, things change, and a lot of what has been at the center of our life shifts. And that's probably quite healthy. In the 100-year life, you can't do the same thing all the time. But we're not set up to think that at around 50, everything's going to change. And I think we should be. What I'd like to be saying to your generation is think about these kind of pivot points in your life and maybe get yourself set up for what that pivot's going to look like at 50, and think about what you might do when this phase ends. I think your generation are much better at things like side hustles or, building up other muscles and ideas of what other things you might want to do, not just be defined by the jobs that we've done for so long. So I think if more of us feel like or expect to shift into a new phase at 50, we can start planning for that. And I think really part of that should be a kind of really amazing trip or adventure, maybe saying to ourselves, we're going to go and do all those things while we still can, while we still have our health. And while we're still kind of fit enough to walk 25 kilometers and 1,800 meters, you know what I mean? While we've still got it, while we can, we need to get on with it. Because I think the thing about being like 50 or 60, or I was at a retreat last week, some women who were over 70 were amazing walking up mountains. Because we've got this health and this opportunity, it's kind of like, if not now, when? And I was talking to a lovely woman the other day who's written a great piece for me on the Noon website about taking up surfing at 50. And she was like, well, it's not going to get any easier if I leave it till I'm 60, is it? So there's that great thing of or another friend who's just started learning Spanish. She was like, I've always wanted to speak Spanish. I was thinking, I better get on with it, So I think that there's that kind of drive of we're still kind of young and fit, but we may not have that much more time still having all our marbles. So we need to get on with it. And I think that that's particularly true around travel.
Definitely. And do you think that some of these factors, like, I've always wanted to learn Spanish, so I'm going to go to Spain and I'm going to learn it, or, I've always wanted to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, things like that. Do you think these
I haven't. I really don't want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro. I know too many people have done it and say it's hell.
It's definitely not something you're going to see me doing anytime soon, if ever.
Mount Tube Carl, another thing I really don't want to do, but I know that there are some people who do, that's fine. But
do you think these sort of inner wants and ambitions are key things in people planning travel experiences? Like, what goes into your travel experiences? How do you plan your trips? Whether it be a retreat or whether it be a family holiday, how do you go about making the most out of those experiences now you're in your queenager, era of your life?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think a bit of planning is good. We did a brilliant trip recently, me and my husband and my elder daughter, while she was doing her A-levels. She was studying classics. So we went to Greece and we went to Marathon, we went to Epidauros, we went to the shrine high up in the mountain, the Delphic Oracle and all that kind of thing. And my husband did the most brilliant bit of planning. He kind of worked out, how much we could drive in a day, where the Airbnbs needed to be, where we stayed, what things we could go and see. And we had the most idyllic 10 days kind of driving around Greece, going to these lovely places. So I think it's really worth kind of thinking about what you want to see and kind of, planning the route. And of course, that takes quite a lot of time, which is why a kind of Jules Verne tour is quite a good idea, because then you get the experts to do it for you. But certainly as I get older, my time is a bit more precious. I think when you're traveling, you either have time or money take you. So when if money is in short supply, then you often, you go to India and you take a bus and you take a night train, and it doesn't matter how long it takes to get there because you've got lots of time. Whereas I think now I'm more likely to get on a plane to do those kind of distances because I want to kind of pack a bit more in, and I don't know quite how many overnight bus rides one needs to do in one's 50s, that kind of thing. So I think a bit of planning is good, but I also think really being adventurous. I mean, I absolutely loved. And for me, I think there's something really important about the difference between being a tourist and really doing that traveling. What was wonderful about being in Morocco was really living with the local women like they did. I mean, for instance, watching them cook food. We had one afternoon where we all kind of learned how to prepare tagine. And what was incredible to me was how they didn't waste any bit of the vegetable. I have to say I'm quite bad if I'm peeling carrots. I kind of quite often cut off quite a lot of the carrot and peel it kind of quite down. And whereas these women, it was such a lesson and actually a bit of an inspiration that they peeled it so carefully so that you would get as much of the goodness of the vegetable. And of course, they didn't really have very much in the thing. They would even use the kind of skins of the peas and stuff like that. So that was really interesting, that just kind of how much of everything they managed to incorporate into the food. And I think that there was also something so magical about living in the way that they did. We didn't have any alcohol. We all drank peppermint tea. We sat on the floor around low tables. We all slept on mats like the women did in the house. One of the women would get up, who in one of the houses would get up at kind of 4 a.m. to make flatbreads for us for breakfast. And you could see that, the fire where she'd been sitting in. So I think it was really moving to really understand the kind of nitty gritty of their lives. There was one moment we walked past a graveyard where I write about this in my book, where there was one really big graveyard, and there's the kind of normal, and I was like, well, what's this graveyard? We walked past one, and then we walked into another one, which was much bigger, and the much bigger one was the child graveyard, because of course in developing countries, not all they have very different levels of infant mortality. And so the child graveyard was huge. There were just little rocks everywhere representing all these children. And the Berber lady said, well, in our culture, we're not supposed to cry when babies die, but the women might move closer to the fire so no one can see, so she can say that her eyes are watering because of the smoke. So it was that kind of thing, which I think suddenly gives you an insight into the way that people live, or the way that the women have to think, or the strictures on their lives, which just kind of going around in a tour bus will never show you. So for me, that kind of traveling is always about really kind of leveling with the culture where you are, being with the local people. And we very much do that in Jamaica. And that for me is really important, feeling like you've broken through that tourist barrier and you actually really get a bit of a sense of what it's like to be somebody who lives there. And also, of course, our common humanity. And what was wonderful in Morocco was our Berber guide, Mama Bia, came up to me at the end and she said it had been so wonderful kind of seeing our group and all these women. They were great. And I said to her how wonderful it was what she'd shown us had made it so that there was this incredible exchange between, for her, she can now make a living as a mountain guide. And from our women being able to be led by her had been so rich in terms of the experience. So I think there's also a way that women can pay it forward for each other.
And as you've touched on, it's all about getting to know the people as well as the place, and kind of take away that experience, but also, realize that we're all in this together. It's one planet. Yes, it's different cultures, but ultimately we all share the same experiences of highs and lows, losses, grief, all of that. So to have those guides with you who can kind of explain what you're seeing, it just must touch your heart in a completely different way.
I think it's a really different way. I mean, one of the other amazing trips I did, because as a journalist, I've also done a lot of travel writing. And I went to China and I went to attend a women's conference in China. But I then went and I walked in the rice fields. So I got these incredible rice fields which reflect the sky. So it's like you get the whole of the sunset reflected in the kind of rice paddies. And we walked right over this mountain. That was incredible. And I went to Guilin. And I'd always thought that all those mythological portraits in China of the kind of weird rocks with the clouds kind of around them that we see, I always thought that was just fairy tales. But when you go to China, what you realise is that that's real. that actually is their topography. They have these karst pinnacles and the clouds around them. And that's just, how it is there. So that's always amazing too.
So where is next for you then? Because you have this amazing experience traveling on your own, traveling as a family, traveling with your fellow Queenagers. So what is next for you travel-wise? Where are you going, or where do you want to go? What's on your bucket list?
Well, one of the places I've always really wanted to go is Japan, which I've never done. I've always wanted to go there. And I'm also fascinated by South Korea. I've been watching a lot of kind of movies and things around there. So there's a bit of me that quite fancies that. I have to say, having gone to China recently, what you feel when you fly into Shanghai or to Beijing is just that we here in the West, what we think of as the developed world, are like becoming almost like the developing world compared to them in terms of the technology and what's possible and how people think. And I also think it's really important as a Brit to kind of get out of kind of Western Europe and go and see what's going on in the other side of the world, because I think it's quite salutary in terms of just challenging our sense that we're at the center of the world. And similarly, when you go to America, you realize that the infrastructure there and stuff is absolutely terrible. Bridges are falling down, roads are really wrecked, the airports are really shoddy, all those kind of things. So I think it really profoundly challenges one's sense of what's modern and kind of what isn't, or, where the next bit of kind of growth or culture is going to come from. I think that's really interesting. And I'm also really interested in kind of Uzbekistan and the Silk Road. I've always had a thing. I've read a lot of Marco Polo when I was little, and I've always wanted to kind of go to some of those places, Samarkand. So I have a bit of a thing about that. I always want to go back to India. I've never been to Cusco and to Machu Picchu and Peru. I fancy that. I'd like to go to the Galapagos, just in terms of kind of bucket lists. I absolutely love my time in Central America, so I'd always go back there. And the Caribbean is always somewhere that I love, and I love diving. So I think the world is so rich, so full of possibilities. I'd like to go walking in Albania in the mountains there. A friend of mine just did that. I still haven't been to Croatia. I've spent a lot of time in Greece, but I've never actually been to Croatia. So there's all sorts of places that I'd like to go. And Leningrad or St. Petersburg, as it now is again, has always been on my bucket list. So lots of places. It's definitely not done yet.
The possibilities are endless, and we cannot wait to see what you do next. We cannot wait to carry on following you, working with you, and just enriching everybody's lives with your passion, experience, and just your enthusiasm. It's been amazing. So before we go, please tell our listeners, where can they find out more about you, the Queenager movement? Where can we get your book? Give yourself the biggest plug, because of everyone, you deserve this.
Oh, thank you so much, Abbey. So the best place to go to find what I'm doing is noon.org.uk, and there people can sign up for my Queenager newsletter, which used to be on Substack. It was a Substack bestseller, but we've actually put it onto our own platform now. So if you want to get the Queenager, which is my weekly newsletter to our whole base, that's now on noon.org.uk, and you can sign up for it there. My book, Much More to Come, Lessons on the Mayhem and Magnificence of Midlife, is published by HarperCollins and was a Times bestseller this summer. And I also read the audiobook if anyone would rather listen to my dulcet tones than wade through the pages. I quite understand that. And Noon, we do all sorts of events and retreats and circles all the way around the UK and now in America too. So that is a really expanding movement. We do a lot of stuff online if you're not in London or you're, not even in the UK. So that's a real global thing. We have a book club and that kind of thing. Yeah, and you can also hopefully you're going to be able to come on a Jules Verne Noon Voyager tour in the very near future. So if you're interested in what I'm doing, I also write regularly in the UK press and for various magazines and things. But if you're interested in what I've been talking about in terms of Queenagers, the best bet probably is my book, Much More to Come, and signing up for the Queenager newsletter on noon.org.uk.
Eleanor, thank you so much for your time today. I always enjoy listening to your stories and just listen to the inspiration that oozes out of you. You are an incredible person and an incredible Queenager. So thank you so much for your time today. And I hope everyone's enjoyed listening to this conversation as much as I've enjoyed having it.
Oh, well, thanks very much for having me, Abbey. It's been great to come on.
I really hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I did. We'd love to hear what you think. So please leave us a review on Apple or wherever you get your podcast. Or you can head over to our Facebook or Instagram accounts or our website, vjv.com. And don't forget, our episodes alternate between full-length conversations and short, sharp chats. So to make sure you don't miss out, subscribe now to get those episodes in your inbox as soon as they launch.